Hello, hello, good people of the internet, and welcome to what will probably end up being the start of a new series for my channel. Hey! As some of you guys might know, because I've mentioned it in a couple other videos, mostly my how to make income as an artist video, I do Artist Alley at anime conventions, which is basically I go to cons and I set up a table for the weekend, and then all weekend I am there selling my art, making money off of my work, and that is actually not my main source of income, but it is a large source of income supplement for me. I've been doing Artist Alley for a couple of years now, and I've decided that something I want to try and start doing is doing not full vlogs. This isn't going to suddenly turn into a vlog channel, but I would like to start doing a series talking about Artist Alley experiences at different cons and kind of just talking about what certain cons are like, my personal experiences, how I sell things there, how it kind of works. And I thought that this video would make a good first edition because I was at a convention this past weekend and it was an experience, and we're going to talk about it. So I'll start off by saying this video is going to be less scripted than my storytime videos. I've got a lot of bullet points laid out in a document in front of me, but I am just gonna kind of be a little bit more freeform when I'm talking about these, just because it takes less time if I don't fully script them. So this past weekend, I was at a very small con near me called Anime Austin. Anime Austin's a con that's been running for a couple of years, and then I've actually been as an attendee several times. However, because of the panini and everything, it's been a couple of years since the con has been run. So here's how I ended up getting a table at this con, right? I applied for a table at Anime Austin 2020 back in early 2020, back when we weren't sure how long the panini was going to last, and I optimistically said, hey, if you guys are still planning on running the con at the end of the summer, give me a table. I would love to have a table for it. And they still had spots available, so they gave me a spot. They took my money. It was about $100 for a table. And then the con got canceled. And they sent out an email and said, hey, if you want a refund, that's fine. We'll give you a refund. But if you want, we'll just hold on to your table reservation, and then the next time we run the con, you will have a rollover table and you'll still be able to vent there. And since I was still interested in doing the con, I opted not to get a refund and figured, okay, well, they'll just let me back in whenever the con happens again. I did this for several cons. MomoCon was delayed twice, and I just stayed on the roll for that one so that when it eventually rolled around again, I would be on it. I forget, there was at least one other con that did this. So I didn't mind waiting. I figured, hey, I've got a table reserved for the con. When it eventually comes back, I'm cool with just waiting. 2 years later. But yeah, so the con went radio silent for the rest of 2020, all of 2021. Early 2022, I start realizing, oh, maybe this con is dead. I wonder if there's still a way for me to get my money back, because, you know, other cons that had been delayed were starting to announce their new dates, and Anime Austin is usually a con that happens during the summer. So when it started to roll around, it got to spring and then early summer, and there was still no updates on when the next Anime Austin was going to occur. I started thinking, okay, maybe this con was killed by the pandemic. Maybe we're just never gonna get an Anime Austin again. So I emailed the staff and I asked, hey, you guys were offering refunds. I need to know if I could still get a refund for this table. Alternatively, if you know if there are any updates, are you still planning on having the con? Can you give me something? Alternatively, just give me a refund. Radio silence. I emailed them a couple of different times, a few weeks apart, with that exact sentiment of, hey, do you know when the con is going to be happening? Are you trying to get the con back in order? Give me some kind of update or give me a refund on the table that I paid for. Radio silence every single time. I emailed them at least 3 times. Nothing. So at this point, I'm thinking, okay, the con is dead. I have been ghosted. I'm just gonna get a chargeback through my bank. Try to get a chargeback through my bank. Try to get a chargeback through PayPal. I had missed the chargeback deadline for both of them because it had been 2 years since I made this payment. So I figured, okay, well, maybe I just lose that $100. But then, out of nowhere, in like spring, early summer of 2020, they announced new dates for the con happening in November, and they say that artists' applications are now open, and hey, person on our mailing list, you should totally go and apply for a table for the 2022 convention. To which I said, well, wait, what the hell? I've already paid. Why are you telling me to apply? So I emailed them back again. I said, hey, saw that you have new dates for the con. That's great. Can you please confirm that I have a rollover table just so I know, because I got this email and I don't think I should have. I'm glad that the con is still happening, but can you please give me an update on whether I have a rollover table or not? Radio silence. Absolutely nothing. I emailed them several times over the course of the next month or so, asking for just a simple yes or no. I said, hey, can you please give me an update on whether rollover artists will have a table? Nothing. No response. I replied several times to the original email that got sent out when they announced the con was being delayed, saying, hey, can you just confirm that rollover artists still have tables? No response. They started posting on social media, so I started commenting on their posts and asking, hey, any news about rollover artists? I need to know if I have a table for this con so I can block off this weekend in my schedule. No response. I started DMing them through social media. Still no response. I had to harass this con for literal months to get an answer to a yes or no question, until finally, about 2-ish months before the con, they finally said, yes, artists who paid for their tables in 2020 still have a spot at the convention. Thank you for answering my yes or no question that took me about 6 months to get an answer on. Very cool. So at this point, I was already super done with them, but I figured I paid for the table, it's not worth fighting them to get a refund on it. I'm basically still local, so I might as well just go and make some money. When I say basically local, I paid for the table back when I lived in Austin. I used to live only about 15 minutes away from their venue. Their venue, by the way, is a Holiday Inn, which is a very small hotel. Not really a venue for a big convention. This hotel couldn't fit more than a few hundred people inside of it. It's very baby con feeling. So I used to live only about 15 minutes away from this venue. But since I paid for the table in 2020, I've actually moved about an hour north of where I used to live, which means that I am now about an hour and 15 minutes away from this venue. And I didn't think that paying for a hotel would be worth it, and I didn't want to have to worry about finding a pet sitter for my cats. So I just decided I was going to drive into the convention every day, which totaled out to a little over an hour in each direction, meaning I was driving for about 2.5 hours each day to get to this con. Which I figured wasn't too bad. I can make it work. I usually have to drive into Austin when I want to go to certain stores that they don't have near me. It's not a huge deal. It's more driving than I would like to do. But again, I didn't want to fight the con for a refund. I'll just go make some money and then just be done with the whole thing. So we're approaching the con. We're leading up to the con. It's a couple weeks before the con. And usually conventions, a few weeks to a few months before the convention happens, they'll send out a map with your placement so that everybody in Artist Alley, everybody in the dealer's room, everyone who is exhibiting knows where in the exhibitor's hall they are. They know where their table is. And this is helpful for artists like me who like to put out announcements on social media that say, hey, if you want to come find me during this convention, this is where my table will be. This is my table number. You can come and find me here. And we're rapidly approaching the con, and Anime Austin has not announced anything about any kind of map, any kind of schedule, anything. Like I said, I'd been to Anime Austin as an attendee a couple of times. I knew the venue. I was familiar with the venue. I knew that Artist Alley was in a hallway of the hotel and Dealers was in a separate room. But again, we were rapidly approaching the con, and no one knew where their tables were going to be because they hadn't sent out any kind of table map or placement yet. About a week before the convention, all of the artists get an email that basically says, setup will begin at 12 p.m. on Thursday, the day before the convention, and tables will be assigned when you arrive. And I sent a clarification email asking, does this mean we do not have assigned table layouts in advance? And they say, no, you'll be assigned a table when you get to the venue. Which means that artists and dealers didn't have pre-planned table placements. It was first come, first serve, free-for-all for table placements. Which is great if you're like me and you only live an hour from the venue so you can drive in and just get your spot set up and then go home. But I was in the group chat for a lot of other Artist Alley folks who were complaining that they weren't getting to the con until Friday morning and were going to basically be stuck with the leftover tables, which is shitty. I'm just gonna go ahead and come out and say it. It's shitty. Give people a table. Don't punish people who can't be there on Thursday to set up. I would have preferred to not waste gas driving in on Thursday if I didn't have to. Just assign your artist tables. But anyway, will be more debacle about the tables because here's what we found out. I drove in on Thursday. I showed up at exactly 12 p.m. to get a table at this con, and I got what I would consider a very good spot. It was right between the dealer's hall entrance and the main events entrance, which means that I was basically at the exact center of the con. Probably everyone who went to this convention passed by my table at least once, which is a good spot, I would argue. But not everyone was so lucky, because I found out during setup that first day that the convention oversold their tables, which meant that they sold more tables to artists and dealers than they could actually fit inside of the venue. I talked to a couple of people who got turned away at the door. These artists who have already paid for a table and have paid to come to this convention. Some of them were driving from Houston or DFW, who drove down to this con and then were told by the con, we don't have a table for you. You cannot vend at this convention. That is maybe one of the worst things I have ever heard from an Artist Alley. Because on the one hand, yes, they did give refunds to those people for the tables that they could not provide, or at least I'm pretty sure they did. However, the people who drove in from out of town, they had to pay for a hotel, they had to pay for gas, they had to pay for food, they had to pay for all of this other stuff that local artists didn't have to worry about. And they can't get refunds for that, so what are you gonna do about that, con? What I think happened, I have no proof of this is all speculation. What I think happened, based on the poor communication that I received as a rollover artist, is that the con, when they opened up applications for Artist Alley tables in 2022, once they finally had their 2022 dates set out, I think that maybe they just forgot that the rollover artists existed and then proceeded to fill in a full convention's worth of artists, and then when they finally realized, oh, all of the rollover people still have to have tables as well. Uh-oh. And that is what caused the cluster swear to happen. Again, this is completely just me theorizing. I have no idea if this is actually true. That's just the impression that I get based on my experience. So there's, of course, drama about the tables, because when I bought a table in 2020 for the rollover, I was only given the option, you get a table. It's just a table. Your standard Artist Alley 6-foot table. You just pay for the table, you get the table. It's easy. However, what I found out later was that some artists who were not rollover artists, who paid for their tables in 2022 for the 2022 convention, signed up for corner tables, which means that instead of just one table in line in a row with all the other artists, you would have a table on a corner, and the table corners are nice because you have 2 whole tables to yourself. It's a lot more visible, it's a bigger display, and usually these tables, these corner booths, come at a higher cost. And so people pay more money for more display space and ideally making more income based on that improved display. And I talked to at least one person at this convention who paid for a corner table and wasn't given a corner table until she went and complained to staff about it. Because yes, if you pay for a corner table, you should get a corner table. But yeah, it was, so some people paid for special treatment and special tables, but also table placements were a free-for-all. So your table placement, whether you were a corner booth or not, was decided by what time you got to the convention. It was a cluster swear. I'm just gonna say that. This is a nightmare that should not have happened. But from what I have heard, the con was running with extremely minimal staff, and so I don't think it was any one person in particular's fault. It was just a cataclysm of all kinds of terrible things. I've been talking for almost 20 minutes and we haven't even gotten to the actual con yet. That's how messed up this convention was. But anyway, a couple of other things. So I said earlier that the convention was happening in a very small hotel, and the artist alley was basically just in the hallway of that hotel, which was okay, but the problem was that these hallways were extremely narrow. I took a little bit of footage as I walked through the con, but I guess they just ran out of space in the main hallway and started cramming tables into the narrowest parts of the hallways to the point where artists couldn't even really sit properly behind their tables. It was a claustrophobic nightmare at one point in this one area of the convention. I was stuck at my table all weekend, so I really only got to experience this when I filmed this walkthrough, and it was a nightmare. If it was crowded, if someone was standing in front of a table to buy something, you could not pass that table. This is a fire hazard is what it feels like, but anyway. Another thing is that if you were in the dealer's room or one of the other side rooms that they set aside for Artist Alley that I was not in, if you were out in the main hallway, the lighting was terrible. I ended up bringing a ring light that I use as a desk light from home on the second day to help light my display better, and honestly, I might start bringing it to all of my cons because it ended up working really well. It's just a USB-powered ring light, and it, according to a friend on Twitter, made it look like my table had a side quest for people. And I love that. Come to my table. I've got quests for you. Come to my table, con goer. I have side quests for you. Go fetch me 12 MacGuffins. I don't know. But anyway, so I mentioned there was the separate rooms. They had some artists in this separate room that had been used as a panel room in previous years of the convention. This room had much better lighting and was in the same room as the guests, the special guests like the voice actors at the con. And it was going to be locked up at night, which the tables in the hallway weren't going to be locked up at night. So there was a slightly lower risk security-wise if you were in the second room, and the lighting was a lot better. I had the option to set up in that room, but I opted not to because I was concerned it being in a separate room meant there wouldn't be as much foot traffic, which would lead to fewer sales. So I opted not to do that. I talked to a couple of people who were set up in that room, and they said the traffic was okay, but yeah, it was really cramped, and you can see it in the video that I added. So anyway, we're 20 minutes in. Let's actually talk about the con now. Friday, day one, was miserably slow. It was just this cold, rainy day in November, and I'm pretty sure that most people attending the con had to go to work or school that day. Which, again, this con used to be in the summer where this wouldn't have been so much of an issue, but my god, it was slow. And it was also right before Thanksgiving, so maybe people weren't taking the Friday before Thanksgiving off. I don't know. Point is, there was like barely anyone at this con. Most of the people I talked to that day were other artists who were just bored and walking around. It was really boring. It picked up a little bit in the evening after people got out of work and school, but by the time the dealer's hall closed at 7, I was just ready to be done and go home. I could have stayed longer if I wanted to. Like I said, since I was in the hallway, I could have stayed as late as I wanted. Artist Alley people who were in the hallway, we pretty much could have packed up and left. We could have assigned our own hours. We can get there whenever we want. We can close up whenever we want. It just depends on when we want to be there. So I could have stayed longer if I had wanted to, but I was so bored out of my skull at that point that I just packed up and left as soon as the dealer's hall closed. And here's the worst part of it. So, if you guys have been following me for any amount of time, you probably know that I am a comic artist. That is one of my main pillars of income, is my webcomic, Castoff. Go read it, castoff-comic.com. There's a link in the description. Hey. So, when I come to conventions, I usually bring my iPad with me. When it's slow, I can just whip out my tablet and I can sketch comic pages between customers. That way, even if I come home from a con with less money than I hoped, I can still come home with some sketching work done, meaning that I will be a lot less stressed in the following weeks. So you'd think that since Friday was really slow, I would have gotten a ton of comic pages sketched that day, right? This is no one's fault but my own, but I realized after driving an hour and a half to get to the venue that I left my iPad at home, and I had to sit behind my table staring into space, looking at my phone and or doodling in my inventory notebook for the entire, 8+ hour day. I got there, I think, at noon. I got there just before noon on Friday. I didn't leave until 7. So, almost a full 8 hours of just sitting there doing nothing and wasting my life away. I got a few sketches and thumbnails for future merch done just on some scrap paper, but overall it was just an entire day wasted and I barely made any money. It was the worst. Thankfully, things picked up on Saturday, but it was still really slow compared to some of the larger cons I've been to, which, I mean, it's a small con. It's not going to have the same traffic flow as a larger Comic-Con, but it's still slow. I thankfully remembered my iPad on day 2, so I actually did get some comic pages done. Again, read my webcomic, by the way, link in the description. It's pretty good. I had a few friends come on Saturday to pretty much just show up just to compete in the cosplay contest, and so I talked to them for a little bit, and talking to them, I realized something else about this con. Con had pretty much nothing to do at it. They had panels, but the schedule never got added to their website. The only place you could see the schedule was on their Facebook page, a couple of posts down. And I guess they were also handing out pamphlets with the schedule in it, but why wasn't the schedule on the website? Put your schedule on your website! Also, there was no game room, there was no karaoke room, there were no screening rooms, there was no meetup schedule. Aside from shopping and going to panels, there was nothing to do. Which, okay, most conventions that you go to, most anime, game, comic conventions, whatever type of con it is, but usually conventions will have some sort of side activity to keep people entertained between panels and shopping. Stuff like a game room where you can just play video games. Sometimes they have tournaments. These are great if you have an hour or two to kill before the next event you want to go to. And they're just great if you just need to sit down and chill for a little bit. You can watch some anime in a screening room or something. This con had panels, yes, but outside of the panels, really the only thing to do was go shopping in the dealer's hall or the artist alley, which meant that you were basically paying $45 for a weekend pass to go shopping. And here's the worst part. They weren't checking badges. At most cons, they either check your badges when you walk into the con itself, or before you go into panel rooms, dealers' halls, etc. Sometimes they check them at both, at multiple locations, to really make sure that you're not sneaking in without paying for a pass. They want to make sure that you're actually paying for the con if you're going to be doing con-related activities. This con, Anime Austin, made you spend money on a badge. Like I said, I think it was $45 for a weekend badge. And then they never checked your badges again. And I would know, like I said, I was sat directly between the dealer's hall and main events. I knew when they were checking badges and when they weren't because I could overhear pretty much any conversation that happened in front of either of these two rooms. Most of the time, there was no one there checking badges. There was maybe someone checking badges outside of one or both of these rooms, maybe 10% of the entire weekend, and that I think is being generous. There was actually a guy sitting outside the dealer's hall for the first part of the day on Sunday, but he was only paying attention to his phone, and he never looked up even when people walked past him. And I would know, because again, I was sitting there watching him the entire time, just stare at his phone when people just walked past him. He didn't even pretend to look up to check their badges. It was wow. And so here's a fun little anecdote about that. Someone left their badge at my table on Sunday, and I tried to wave him down and get his attention to ask if there was a lost and found, because I was running the table by myself, and I figured whoever lost this badge probably wants it back, but I didn't know if there was a lost and found anywhere, and I couldn't leave my table because I didn't want my stuff to get stolen. So I leaned over and I was waving at him, and I was trying to get his attention to the point where I was basically almost yelling at this guy. I was sitting less than 6 feet from him. He was just out of arm's reach at me, and I was really trying to get his attention. He didn't even move. I have never been so thoroughly ignored in my entire life. It was almost kind of funny. I was just like, holy shit, I have never seen someone so out of touch with their surroundings that they just completely ignore me, yelling, "Hey, staff! Staff guy, I have a question. Hey, staff! You're staff, right? Hey!" Basically just sitting there and doing that, and just, it was like I didn't even exist. It was kind of hilarious, actually. But I mean, I guess it didn't really matter that that person lost their badge, because they weren't checking badges anyway, so I guess it all ended up fine in the end. So what I'm saying is that pretty much everyone who came to this con paid a lot of money for a relatively useless piece of paper, because yeah, the badges were made of paper. Mine ripped by day 2, and then I couldn't use the lanyard for it anymore. Thankfully, they gave me a second one, because most Artist Alley tables come with 2 badges, so I just switched to the other one. But again, they weren't checking badges, so it did not matter. I could have just shown up to this con without paying for a table and just set up, and no one would have looked at me twice. No one would have checked. No one ever checked my badge when I was sitting at my table. I could have just freeloaded on this con if I wanted to. I didn't, but I could have if I wanted to. But yeah, so here's a fun little fact, actually. The con made a post on their Instagram on day 2 talking about, like, the cosplay contest or something, and someone pointed out that to look at the comments on that post, because my god, they were not kind. And frankly, I agree with them, because yeah, I would not have wanted to pay $45 for this con. There's fucking nothing to do. My friends who came on Saturday did win an award for the cosplay contest though, so that's neat. As far as sales go, Saturday I did more than double what I made on Friday, which was good, because if sales hadn't picked up, I was seriously considering not coming back on Sunday. But they did pick up, so I did stick around for Sunday. Sunday, day 3. Day 3. Sunday was almost as slow as Friday. I still made good money, but I ended up making even less than I did on Friday, which is really saying something, especially because a lot of times at conventions, people will save their shopping for Sunday because they're trying to get deals, or they really want to experience the con before spending money in the Artist Alley or the dealer's room. And so honestly, Sundays can be the busiest days for convention Artist Alley. And so the fact that I made more on slow-ass Friday than I did on Sunday is really telling of, I don't know, something. It was also a shorter day, which may have factored into it. People really didn't start showing up until closer to noon, because I assume everyone was out partying Saturday night. And then the dealer's hall closed at 3. Since it was so slow, I ended up just packing up half an hour early and just going home. So that was the weekend. Couple of final notes. Because of the times we live in, some people probably want to know what kind of safety protocol was in place for wearing masks and stuff. Because a lot of cons require you to wear a mask, because conventions with a lot of people can be places where certain diseases are spread. So what was the COVID safety policy at this con? There wasn't one. Probably 80 to 90% of the people there weren't wearing masks. The con had no mask policy to speak of. I personally wore a mask all weekend because while I have the immune system of a god and haven't gotten sick since 2006, I have a lot of stuff to do and don't want to fall behind by getting sick about something. Whether that's from COVID or any other kind of con funk, I just don't want to deal with it. So I wore a mask all weekend, and it is now the Tuesday after as I'm recording this, and I'm still not sick. Because I got shit to do. Anyway, that was just, it didn't feel right. It felt weird. It's like, please stop breathing your germs on me. Put something over your face, goddamn. So, at the end of this video, let's talk about money. And I'm gonna go ahead and say, I'm going to not say my exact numbers. I'm not doing this for bragging. I'm just talking numbers for transparency and to give people an idea what I mean of when I say a good show versus a bad show. So I came into this con with a goal. I wanted to make $2,000. That was my goal for this show. And where did I pull that number out of, you might be asking? Well, to me, 2,000 at a show like this is a reasonable number, considering it's a little bit less than what I made at a similar sized con in Houston earlier this summer. I made about $2,400 at Delta H Con in Houston in August, and that con was also pretty small and slow, so I figured that $2,000 at Anime Austin would be a pretty good goal. So how much did I actually make? Before accounting for expenses, I made a little bit over $1,300 for the full weekend. But we have to subtract expenses from that, of course. I didn't get a hotel, I didn't bother with food or anything, I just brought snacks from home and then ate at my house. So the table fee was about $100, and considering I used about a tank and a half of gas over the weekend, gas costs were about $50. So you subtract all that, I made a little bit less than $1,200 for the weekend in profits. So let's divide that up by how much time I actually spent at this con over the weekend. 8 hours on Friday, 8 hours on Saturday, 4 hours on Sunday, and about 8 hours of driving over the course of the weekend, because again, I live about an hour from the venue. If we divide that up, I made about $40 an hour for the full 3 days. Which, here's the thing. That's not anything to sneeze at. That money's gonna be going towards bills for next month and Christmas presents for my family. I don't want to sound ungrateful for that money, obviously. But that's really not a lot in the grand scheme of things. And let me give you an example. I did another very small con at the Pflugerville Library a couple of weeks before this con. It's a teeny tiny, free-to-attend, one-day convention in Austin called Pflugerville Library Con. This thing, I was kind of shoved into a room with other artists. I didn't see the full scope of the con, but they had maybe 500 attendees at this thing. I made more in one day at that con than I did at Anime Austin over a full weekend, and I was only at Pflugerville Library Con for a total of about 6 hours. So 6 hours for about $1,200, or a full weekend for about $1,200. That's a bad comparison. That's not favorable to Anime Austin at all. That is why I say that I did not make enough money at this con. I could have spent my time actually getting work done, doing things around my house, hanging out with my family or my cats, and instead I was at a slow convention all weekend and got bored and got a little bit of work done, but not as much as I could have, and I didn't even make the full amount of my mortgage payment. As I have a house and I've started considering it's a good con when I make about my mortgage payment every day, because my mortgage is expensive, but I'm constantly thinking in intervals of my mortgage payment. This is what adulthood has done to me. So, will I be going back to Anime Austin? After this year, probably not. Unless they have some very major overhauls in their convention programming, location, communication, and overall quality event, I don't really think it's worth going back to. If I still lived in Austin and was only about 15 minutes away, maybe. But considering how much driving I had to do to get there and back every day, and the money I had to spend on gas, honestly, going back would be more trouble than it's worth. And based on how everyone I talked to at the con seems to feel about it, it honestly wouldn't surprise me if this con didn't have another year. Which is sad because, conventions are supposed to be fun, and you want conventions to do well, and you want small cons to grow so that they can foster that community. I don't want the con to fail, but they need to do some very, very, very serious overhaul if they want to have a successful show in the future, because, my god, this was a rough show. So, that about wraps it up for my summary of Anime Austin, but before you go, I got some talking points. First of all, like I said, this is gonna be probably the start of a series. I am planning on, ideally, doing one of these for every convention I attend in the future, at least larger cons. I might not do them for one-day shows, and I do a lot of one-day shows, but for larger weekend conventions, I definitely want to make this into a series where I can talk about all those in the future. So, I have 3 shows coming up before the end of 2022. And yes, I know that there's only about a month left of 2022. I'm gonna die, but I'm gonna make some dang money, okay? So, I'm going to be at Anime Frontier in Fort Worth in the first weekend of December 2nd through the 4th. I did this one last year in its first year, and it was okay. But I got in off the waitlist for this year, and I'm hoping that they make some improvements, so I'll have a lot to talk about when I make a video for that one. The next one's not really a convention, but I will be selling at Catty Art Market in Austin on December 10th at Dragon's Lair Comics and Games in Austin. This is a small, free event that's more of an art market than a convention, so I probably won't do a video on it. But if you're in Austin or neighboring cities, you should totally pop in and say hi and get your friends and family some Christmas presents from myself and all the other cool artists who are going to be selling there. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge. They had the art market back in May, and that was my first time selling there, and now they're doing it again for the holiday season, and I'm hoping it'll go over this time as well. My last con for 2022 is actually going to be Holiday Matsuri in Orlando, Florida, which is December 16th through the 18th. This is a big one. I have heard so many things about my con, but I have never been, and in fact, this is my first time doing a con in Florida, so I'm very excited. Come say hi to me, Florida peeps. And then my last con that I know I'll be attending is Ikkicon, which is going to be in Round Rock, Texas next January. I've done this con a couple of times over the last few years. I did it last year, and it was certainly something, but I'll talk more about my history with the show when I make my actual Ikkicon video in January of next year. But yeah, I've applied for a lot of conventions coming up, so I'll hopefully have more announcements in the future. Keep an eye on my website. I have a list of all my upcoming events. I'm going to drop a link in my bio. That'll all be down there. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope it was helpful. I hope you stick around for other Artist Alley videos and just other art-related content that I'm planning on doing. If you like this, subscribe for more videos like this in the future. And also, hey, did you know that I stream 3 times a week? You should totally subscribe and come to my streams. I stream art every Monday and talk about cons and other stuff. And I also stream games occasionally. My game streams get archived on my second channel, TheStarfishface, etc. You should subscribe over there too. I'm rambling. I'm gonna go ahead and cut off the video now. Thank you guys for watching. I will see you guys next time. Goodbye.